Hello, and welcome to this month's episode of Diversity Speaks, True Talk with Terri. I'm Terri Howard, Associate Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Herzing University. At Herzing, we believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion are a living, breathing part of who we are and what we do. So we've created this series in part because we wanted to create a forum for civil discourse. Who we won't always agree, but let's speak our truths in a way where we can listen, learn, and as a result, grow. Also, there's a lot of questions out there around topics related to diversity and inclusion, and we hope to shed light on some of these topics and leave you with something to think about. True Talk is about taking the time to really understand everyone. So let's get talking and speak our truths. Today's topic is code switching. I actually remember being a part of a panel at a conference that was focused on leadership and leadership development. One of the panel members was asked to speak on the topic of authentic leadership and shared some of his personal experiences as a young professional in corporate America. I was struck at the number of times he mentioned examples of how he had to change a little of who he was in order to grow and develop in the workplace. He mentioned changing his style, his communication, and even his haircut in one instance. Was this really being authentic, I thought? Since then, I've really thought about the number of times that I myself have done some code switching, like making the conscious decision to let my natural hair grow, but wear extensions so my hair would appear to be straight. Or the number of times I've had to stifle myself so as not to be perceived as loud. So many years later, and certainly after many experiences, I'm still asking myself the same question. Can you code switch and still be your true self? This is my truth, and it's also a question that we'll discuss today. Let's start by defining code switching and understand how it works, why people do it, and what's the impact. By definition, and put simply by the Harvard Business Review, code switching refers to adjusting one's style of speech, appearance, behavior, or expression in ways that will optimize the comfort of others in exchange for fair treatment. It could also be in exchange for quality service and employment opportunities. Research suggests that code switching often occurs in spaces where negative stereotypes of people run counter to what are considered appropriate behaviors for a specific environment. For example, research conducted in schools suggests that Black students selectively code switch between standard English in the classroom and African American vernacular English with their peers, which elevates their social standing with each intended audience. We also see examples of guidelines encouraging people of color to code switch to survive police interactions, such as acting polite and respectful when stopped, and avoid running even if you're afraid. But why is code switching a topic we need to discuss? First, approximately 2/3 or 65% of people of color in the workplace do not feel a sense of belonging in their workplace and say they code switch often. And a whopping 46% of LGBTQ plus employees don't even come out in the workplace. What this means is we have colleagues that are not even comfortable bringing their authentic selves to work. So why do individuals feel the need to code switch? The research and literature suggests several reasons. The first reason may be to achieve some level of power, respect, or advantage. Modifying behaviors to conform to the dominant culture, unfortunately, often feels like a requirement to be recognized for one's efforts and talents or to be promoted, which can bring with it additional economic privileges, obviously, as well as power and freedoms. Another reason is to assimilate into dominant culture. Sometimes code switching is subconscious. Individuals may internalize the narrative that certain behaviors are somehow inherently better than what they grew up with. An attempt to assimilate and adopt these identities as their own, and that's in order to achieve a greater sense of belonging or inclusion. And finally, some people engage in code switching to appear less threatening. Let's face it, there are certain circumstances when code switching can be life saving. Shifting posture, dress, changing accent, or mimicking traditional gender characteristics can reduce the threat of attack from dominant groups. The impact of code switching can be quite exhausting. Dr. Dion Mahaffey, an Atlanta based psychologist and coach, says it's often draining, but does not go as far as calling it inauthentic because it's authentic to be a part of a person's experience. He goes on to say that code switching does not necessarily employ an inauthentic version of self, but rather it calls upon certain aspects of our identity in place of others, depending on the space or circumstance. It's exhausting because we can feel the difference. So, how do we minimize the need for code switching? Our guest today knows a little something about code switching. I am pleased to introduce Cherise Jackson, a Herzing alum who admittedly has done her share of code switching in the workplace. Hello, Cherise, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me.
Great. We've talked a little bit already about code switching in general, but I really would love to hear from you opportunities or experiences where you have had or felt a need to code share. And with that, if you think that's still part of your authentic self in the workplace.
Okay. So, just to let you know, I have done it. I tend to do it from time to time currently as well. Um, so just to give you some experience, I did work for a major company and I had to code switch quite often there daily. So, with that being said, code switching not only by voice, because normally when we talk about code switching, everybody's thinking about voice. So, it's voice, it's hair, it's me in general, who I am.
Mhm,
So, I had to change up a lot of things to be professional, quote unquote.
mhm. And I love that you say quote unquote, right? Because it's professional based on the perspective of some given norms that exist, right? So,
Right.
uh, tell me a little bit though, if code switching allows you still to be your authentic self.
It it does not, unfortunately. You are being someone else and you have to keep that on. So it's like a hold act per se.
Hmm. And I quoted a psychologist earlier in the episode that can be exhausting, right? That can be draining after a while, right? Don't you think?
Very much so. Very much so.
Mhm. So can you tell me a little bit, working in HR, obviously, you are in contact with many employees, whether it's through recruitment or onboarding or training or just ongoing coaching. Have you had the opportunity to talk about this issue in the workplace as an HR professional?
I have. I have. And it actually helps some people to relax a lot when they see that you're not code switching.
Mm-hmm.
So when I am, and I do still do it, like I said, at work. So when I'm in HR talking to my employees, I do code switch. But then I see that they're a little bit uptight. So I'm like, okay, you know what? Let's do this a bit different. Let's just talk down to earth. Let's just get to know one another. And then they're more open to letting me know exactly who they are.
I would guess that the conversation becomes a lot more relaxed at that point.
Yes.
Mhm.
They're more at ease and willing to talk.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. We actually have several questions from our audience today. So I'm going to go to the audience for a couple of questions if you're okay with that, Charisse.
I am.
Okay, great.
Well, first it has to be acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
So a company and the person that you're dealing with, everybody has to accept the fact you are you, and you come with different changes, different ways that you're going to be able to communicate. Not saying that it's not quote unquote unprofessional, but it first has to start there.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if it even starts before that, Charisse, right? So should we be looking at these issues even in school? So as you think back to, your college experience at Herzing or previous experiences in school, are there things maybe that teachers, faculty, staff can promote to help people bring their authentic selves even in that environment?
Yes. Okay. So with Herzing, I code switched. I
Okay.
remember meeting Danielle at Herzing for the very first time, and she's so bubbly. And I came in there and I was like, "Hi, I'm Sharice," just structured, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
And then she started being so bubbly, she wasn't structured. So I
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, she's a little laid back. So let me see if I can be laid back and still be accepted. And I was, and she was, and that our bond since day one has been phenomenal.
So that's awesome, right? Because I think what it says is the more people are able to bring their authentic self, and we're able not only to acknowledge it but embrace it, the more likely we are to bring our authentic selves as well.
Correct,
Mhm.
correct.
Mhm.
But like I said, it also deals with people have to accept it, because when you bring yourself, you never know what you're going to get. And a lot of people aren't willing to accept that.
Understood. Understood. Let's go back to our audience for the next question.
To a certain extent,
Hmm.
you know, because how high you want to go up in a company, and depending on what you look like, you may get it with how you present yourself, and you may not get it.
Hmm.
So I'll give you an example, if I may.
Sure.
Um, so I was at work one day and I was going for a position, with my degree, I had it with my education wise, experience and everything. I had that. But my hair.
Hmm.
So if it wasn't straight, it wasn't really accepted to be higher and be in front of others. So if it's like this, it was more being in the back.
Hmm. And I think that is a struggle that many, particularly women, but now so even men of color struggle with in terms of the norms that exist. And so maybe what we're saying here is we need to change the norms, right?
I believe so.
That's right. That's right. Okay, Sharice, I think we have time for one more question from the audience.
Awesome. Good question. So, if I'm thinking back in my past, I can't remember anything.
Hmm.
I can't remember anything. But going forward, what I have started in the company that I'm with, I start activities, creating activities for us to be able to talk to each other and be able to, understand one another. Code switching is many different languages, and we all are different in our own ways. And it's better to acknowledge that and be appreciative of that, because it builds teamwork. So without a company being acceptance of who you have as individuals and employees, you can't go forward to be bigger, better, and stronger.
I love it. I love it. And so, what I hear you saying, Sharice, is we have some work to do, but it can start on an individual level, and that's just getting to know the people that you work side by side with. Thank you
Correct.
so, so much for being a part of this very important discussion today. I am very proud of you as a Herzing graduate. You certainly represent the Price philosophy in living, breathing form. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cherise, for sharing your truth and inspiring us all to be better than we are today. One of the questions we didn't get to is one I'd like to address here as we close out today's episode. And that is, as a manager, what are some best practices for creating an inclusive workplace? First of all, we need to practice inclusive behaviors. Inclusiveness is not just a broader organizational imperative. No, it's also a daily practice. Leaders can be curious and learn about cultural differences and intentionally invite employees into their networks and actively listen to their input. And start with yourself. Is there an identity that's important to you that you may be hiding or downplaying in the workplace? By bringing more of yourself to the table, you may actually encourage others to do the same. And recognizing your own differences can actually reveal which parts of you are not welcome at work. This way, you can deepen your understanding of the professional dilemmas employees encounter when they bring their whole selves to work. Check your biases. It's very important to both recognize differences at work and be weary of pointing it out when it isn't warranted. If you catch yourself thinking that an employee or coworker is not like other people, engage in self-inquiry. Where do those thoughts come from? For example, you might like your black coworker's hair when it's straightened compared to when it's in its natural style. But why do we feel that way? Engaging in this line of questioning promotes being curious about your biases rather than asking Black people to explain their differences. There's also work to be done at the organizational level. Tackling things like evaluating company culture, understanding that diversity and inclusion are two separate things, and addressing underrepresentation at all levels of the organization are major steps that the workplace can take to minimize the need for code switching and also give everyone a chance to bring their authentic selves to work every day. That's our truth, and that's our show for today. Be well and see you next time.